last year when you were here for the Tucson Festival of Books, the panel that I was lucky enough to host with yourself and Terry McDonald from Sports Illustrated and Bill Finnegan from The New Yorker was about writing lyrically about sports, and kind of a strange title, but we kind of parlayed it into a conversation sort of about writing about what we were talking about earlier, more than just the nuts and bolts and the sports aspect of it. And it ties into exactly what you're talking about. How is it, this is a question I think I asked you last year, how hard is it, or how do you rectify the fact that the center figure in a lot of your writing can't talk back to you, can't give you a good quote? You have to basically pull something out of these 1.5 ton beings, and they're obviously have personalities and emotions, but how do you do that as a writer and as a sports writer?
First and foremost, they can never tell you you're wrong, which is a good thing. That's so much of sports writing goes back to horse racing, which was America's first sport. It does predate baseball, and it is so much in our American character. When they came over here, it was my horse is faster than your horse, and let's bet on it. And that's how it all started. It's a very open, democratic society, and you see a little bit of it here. A guy like Charles Howard can take a Tom Smith in, can take a Red Pollard in. So there's a lot of great palette there to work with. Everybody wants to talk to you. I mean, I go into an NBA locker room right now, maybe twice a week. You get 15 minutes of access to them, and they hide in the training room for 10 minutes of it, okay? There's no access, there's no really any impetus for them to talk to you. The economics are wildly out of whack. Guys older than me who grew up with the greats from Babe Ruth on to Joe Namath, they all made the same amount of money as sports writers. They rode the trains together, they played cards together, there's a greater back and forth. That is not the case anymore. And horse racing has so many characters, they want to talk to you. It's a little bit overlooked, there's not a rush, you only hear about it, the Triple Crown races. And it's gambling, it's fun, it's a little seedy, it's a little dirty, I mean, my wife hates when I say this, but they're like, what's it like to cover the Kentucky Derby? I was like, well, I drink and gamble all day, watch a 2-minute race, and then write about it. And, that kind of gives you the flavor of the place. So you can be lyrical, and you can, it's not poetic license, you can imbue your knowledge that you've gathered over 30 years into something that somebody else doesn't have.
Bill fed me this one too, and he talked about your postcards from Saratoga, which we saw in the movie, the great old course in upstate New York, and that there's a quote in one of them from famous sports writer Red Smith on how to get to Saratoga Springs from New York. You drive north 175 miles, turn left on Union Avenue, and go back 100 years. And that's pretty telling about the environment you're talking about.
And it hasn't really changed. And Red was another guy who loved the horses and loved the scene. And, neither Red or I mean, I've been on the back of a horse when I was a kid, but I've owned them, I've been around them, I haven't trained them. I bet on them, I bet a fortune on them. And there's just something about it that gets into you. And everybody, when you're in Saratoga especially, Saratoga is a place that comes to life 6 weeks in the summer. And everybody there is there because they love horses and know horses and talk horses. I mean, I imagine it'd be the same of Comic-Con for the younger people and Stratford on the Avon when Shakespeare's going on. It's just everybody's there for the same reason. They appreciate it. And it does give you the old-timey feel. And it hasn't changed.
How about some of the smaller tracks? Last year when you were here, you got to spend time at Rieto Park Racetrack here in Tucson, which I think this is its 85th year, if I'm not mistaken. And we were talking about that a little bit earlier, too. Kind of tell us about that experience and how different that might be than your Pimlicos and your Santa Anitas and Churchills and so forth.
I had the best day at a racetrack that I've had in 30 years. It was so much fun. It was the old world. It's what I say, my horse is faster than yours. There's no really money at stake. There's families there. They're dancing, they're eating, their bands in back. It's shorts and beers in your hands and sandals. And it was just a blast. They've done a really good job out there. And it does have history. It was the first was the first starting bell, I believe, is what its history was, and photo finish. It was the first place to have a photo finish. And, you know, those are the kind of places that are getting extinct in horse racing. It's now either at the highest levels or it's out. So it's really nice to see a place like that. And I'm going to spend some time tomorrow with the racetrack program. And they have a great deal of credit to take for what goes on out there, because they run it and pretty much do everything they're asked to out there, which is everything. So it's a unique place here. It's a unique for University of Arizona to run that program and let them have it. But, you know, it's what a day at a track should be. A day at a track should be fun. I mean, period. And, you know, the horse players have great sayings. One of them is, a bad day of a track is better than a good day anywhere else. And, you know, that's the way you got to feel. If you love the track, it doesn't matter if you lose a few bucks. It's just a good time.
You know, you mentioned earlier it's not always fun. There are some occasionally over the decades unsavory things in this industry, and your investigative reporting included a big series in 2012 that was highly acknowledged for looking into potential drug reform and other areas in the horse racing industry. And it's obvious you love the sport and you love being a part of it. At the same time, how do you as a journalist sort of balance that in your own mindset, that you have to sometimes dig into things that aren't perfect? I deal with this with my students all the time. They're U of A students. They're ingrained to love red and blue and bear down and all that stuff, but yet they sometimes have to cover things that are difficult about their classmates even, and this is the conversation I try to have with them. So what tips can you give me to bring back to them about how to balance something you really do appreciate and love, but at the same time you kind of have to open the door every once in a while to things that aren't perfect about it?
And it is your responsibility. And to that, there's two things. First of all, for young journalists especially, anybody you're covering is not your friend. They don't like you. They're not there for you. They're there to move their message through. They're using you as a conduit to the deal. And that's fine. I don't mean that with any malice or anything. It's a professional relationship, like you and your doctor or anything else. So you have to question what they do. And inevitably, in things you like, you have to ask the hard questions. You have to say, did you cheat? Did you do this? The evidence says that. And if you've already built the baseline of trust and respect, give everybody their time, not chummy, and you don't get in arguments with people you're covering. You just say, okay, this is what I know. What do you have to say with it? So that's one. And then second, when you're doing something you feel invested in, just out of joy. I mean, I'm not invested in it any money-wise. I'm invested in my world and my career and my family. And, you know, I've been around the horses long enough to have me evolve. And the first thing that kind of got me woke in the horse world is in 1996, Barbaro broke his leg at the Pimlico in the opening steps of it. And this was in the very advent of internet and emails, and you know, we had the Times had the top 20 emailed stories there, and I was just stunned that everybody was hanging by a thread on this Barbaro story, that, you know, all walks of life, all ages, all sexes were really invested in, is this colt going to live or die and have a life? So, you know, that to me was the moment where I guess the press or me or somebody just didn't really realize how invested people are in animals and their well-being and safety. So, you know, it started there, and then the more I knew about it, I figured out the unsavory practices, and the same guys kept winning with the same methods. And, you know, to me, it's a two-part reason to go after them. Is one, what I'm talking about, safety and welfare of the animal. You shouldn't treat these creatures poorly. And second, from a fan point of view, it should be a level playing field. You know, people are going to put $2 on it. You ought to think you're on an honest trainer who has a healthy horse, who means best by that athlete. And, you know, I talk to this with people in the sports or sports industries. In this day and age, I mean, everything is in a balance. I mean, you can say this about the NFL. There was a moment, I just got back from the Super Bowl, or I did the Super Bowl, and there's that moment early on when Brandon Cooks gets laid out, and it looks like he's not moving. and you didn't think he was going to get up. And I turned to the guy next to me and I was like, the NFL is one incident like that from going out of business, is that if somebody doesn't get up, we know so much now about how it affects brains. We know how dangerous it is. People aren't letting their kids play it. And you do that on national TV in a moment like that. And the forerunner was thinking about that in the Triple Crown of horse racing. I mean, that's the only time the nation turns in 30 million people who don't care about horse racing, and that's fine. But they're there for the spectacle, the hats, the fashion. In fact, it's wildly popular with women. The ratings are driven by women. But if a horse snaps an ankle because he's not been well treated on that, and they have to bring out, and it's awful when you're at a track when they have to lay down a horse. They bring out this, I guess, cover or screen, and they do it. And that's going to put them out of business. So, it's like everything, and I'll swing it back to journalism, everything we hope we do is make people accountable for their decisions. And that's part of the deal. And sometimes it's more fun than others. Sometimes it's easier than others.
This is my last question here, and then if there's a couple of minutes, I don't know where we're at with time, we'd be open to taking some questions from the audience too. Kind of tying to that same thing about, that ties right into what Bill had mentioned earlier, your sort of other half of your role when it's not horse racing season, which is dissecting that intersection of sports culture and money. And you've had pieces about the NFL and its battle with the public and how it stays at its place, and talking about moral outrage bubbling over in college sports. And what part of that, I don't know if I have a direct question here, but what part of that is most fascinating to you when you get away from the track and get to see some of these other areas? I mean, you have a platform with where you work, and do you get to kind of pick and choose what you go after and look at, or do you have a kind of a set schedule that you go on? I mean, you were at the Super Bowl, the college national championships, those kind of things. How does that work in terms of your decision making of what to cover and how to cover it?
Increasingly I do, and I'm going to reiterate this with the younger journalists tomorrow. The best defense is a good offense. If you go and you say, these are 5 things I want to do, and these are 5 ideas I have, and let's talk about them to your editor, most of the time they're going to bite, because they don't want to, journalism is just like any big organization. There's tons of duties everybody has to do. I did what Bill did for 1 year. It was actually 9 months and couldn't get out of it quick enough. I mean, the thing editors have to deal with, what you deal with.
So last year you were serving as the interim sports editor for a little while?
Yeah, and I mean, it was fascinating, but it was hard and it was not my skill set. So you basically try to stay ahead of things. Otherwise, then they have ideas, and I'd like to think my ideas maybe aren't better, but I'm more interested in my ideas than they are. So, I go with things that I'm curious, and I was an English major. I had no journalism background. I played all sports. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, with no video games or anything else in those days. So you just went out and played, and I liked sports enough. I read sports books along with other books and had no intention of going into it. And what had happened was I was in national news. I'm just curious about things and cultures in different places. And in 1988, the Charlotte Hornets got their first NBA franchise. And I was based in Charlotte. I went, and it was election night when Bush beat Dukakis. Hornets won. They come, this is a pro team, and they come washing over the floor. And I think this would be a great book. And it was my first book, and it was an awful book. But it was a book that my editors in Atlanta, we had just gotten the Olympics for '96. And they said, we need a guy who knows news and knows a little bit about sports. And so that was the crossover. And, I think if you come to sports from a broader background, it works for you. And I think the other way around. So, I just try to keep myself curious and keep myself interested. That's about the formula of it.
And the offense is better than defense sometimes. Well, we debate that in sports all the time, but it's good to hear in this case. Do we have anybody that has a couple of questions? I don't mind walking up there with the mic. Will they reach that far?
Yeah. There's one here and one there. Go ahead. You're front, and I'll repeat it.
I wonder what your thoughts are on off-track betting and slot machines on track, and how it's going to affect generally horse racing.
Basically, the question is about the technological marriage of gambling and horse racing specifically. I have every account known to man on my computer. Okay, it is going to help with people who really want to play the game and can't beat at the track. That runs the handle better. The handle's amount of revenues generated, and that part's been proven. The slot machines have not worked. Slot machines were, horse tracks were the Trojan horse for casinos in every state known to man. It started with, okay, we want to build a casino and we're doing it at this horse track because the community's already used to gambling. They've got the footprint in there. They've got the facility in there. But that is just ruined horse racing. I mean, horse racing's in trouble. People up here know it in the program. They've really got to get more innovative. They've got to distinguish themselves as a separate product other than casino gambling. So that part hasn't worked. And right now, we're at the point in horse racing where less is more. There's too many horse races a day. I mean, I live in New York, and in 3 hours away from me, every day they're running in Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, New York, Massachusetts. There's not enough horses to go around. And so they need to bring it back to where it's manageable.
It's wonderful to hear you. I'm a racetracker. I'm also a journalist. Who was your favorite celebrity, horse-wise? Obviously, you're a horse lover, too, and you got to get up and close and personal to some pretty amazing horses. Who was your favorite?
That's a great question. And there's two that you will figure. American Pharoah is the most recent one. Was a tremendous racehorse, was a tremendous personality and animal. This was a horse that could have 90,000 people around him and be eating apples out of a lap of a 90-year-old veterinarian. And I saw this, like somebody's measuring him and a kid gets on his back. He was a very interesting personality. The second was Zenyatta, who was the race mare, who was undefeated and was like John Henry was, always came, or Silky Sullivan, always came from the back. Only lost once, and it was by this much in her very last race against the boys. And then one that nobody I don't get any respect for, is Invasor. And Invasor was a horse that was from Paraguay, who came over here as a 4-year-old, never lost, won the Breeders' Cup Classic, and for some reason everybody dismissed, but it was also a very cool horse. So those are my three, and I count those are the ones that I put my hands on and saw in person. I did not see Secretariat or Seattle Slew in person. Yes.
Your colleague who covers the Supreme Court gave a talk at the law school this week where he talked about how the internet and the demands of the internet have changed how he does his job. I was wondering how that has affected how you do your job.
Was that Adam? Was he here?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, the evolution of journalism. I mean, I didn't quite start with the typewriter. I was just there when we had what was the Trash 80. It was a Radio Shack, and it looked like an Etch-a-Sketch with like 3 lines up on top, and you had to have couplers that you put on a phone, and it like made weird noises when you sent it far away. And now, I mean, you write stories now. I could sit here and write a story. It'll be in circulation in 45 minutes, and they may run it in the paper like 3 days from now. I hope we got subscribers out there. I hope we got print subscribers out there, but I don't even read it in print anymore. And when I do, when I was in the plane here and I got it, I was like, man, I read this 5 days ago. And it really has become a minute-to-minute thing, and you do things differently. Instead of spending all day crafting a lyrical lead and popping it in, something happens, you quick and dirty it down, 300 words, send it through, they look at it, they pop it up, you go back, you write through again, you make calls after that, You know, they get the graphics guys going, so maybe they say, we don't need 1,100 words on this. We can do this with 5 photos and a caption and smart captions. It's amazing, and it's ongoing, and it's changing. I mean, first we had blogs, then they said, nah, no blogs. Then we had Facebook Live. Nope, that lasted a year. No more Facebook Live. So, you know, it's definitely like the tech age that I read and hear about is that, you know, everything's experimental now. And what works may work. Well, if it doesn't work, don't worry about it. We're on to the next thing. I mean, you know, I'll give credit to our place. The Facebook Live didn't work, but we have this podcast called The Daily that's been downloaded 400 million times and is going to be now on radio. So it's very much a work in progress. It's loosened you up to kind of try different things, but it's no doubt changed. I mean, you know, when I started doing this, when I started getting good at it, you know, you worked all day on a story, you turned it in, you went out and drank, you woke up the next morning, you looked at it, you thought, man, the front page, great, on to the next thing. But now, you know, you got to keep moving on it. It's 24-hour, it's a living, breathing cycle. Hope that helped.
You mentioned the concept of a write-through. I mean, that's not new. So I mean, it's some of it has stayed the same. You get your first piece out and then continually update it. It's just how fast the public's seeing it, I guess.
It's how fast the public's seeing it and which way we're going to present it and what platform and how to do it. And that gets far more discussion now. I mean, go look at our Olympic coverage. We've got 36 people over there now, and only 11 of them are reporters. We've got graphics people, we've got video people, we've got illustrators, we've got social media people. We got a ton of different things. It's just become more of a technology company than a straight old media company. Anybody else out
Do we have
there?
any other questions out here?
Could I get an autograph?
I think Joe would probably be happy to sign a few books.
Sure.
I've heard that from a couple of folks. Well, how about some final thoughts today, Joe, on the movie, on everything we're talking about, just in general, to close up shop?
I want to thank you. I want to thank Jeff. I want to thank Bill in the journalism department, the U of A. This kind of took hatch last year when I was out here for the Tucson Book Festival, which was tremendous. And, you know, this was fun. And I hadn't watched this movie probably since it came out. And I thought it was terrific. And I thought it touched a lot of things. And I think in spirit, it was journalistic. You know, it's the backstory of how it gets from there to here is something. So thank you all for having me. And I look forward to talking to students tomorrow.
Thank you, Joe Drape. We appreciate it. Thanks to all the sponsors of this wonderful program. They're up here: the New York Times, the Daily Star, the Daily Wildcat, UATV3 Student Journalism, the School of Journalism, College of Social and Behavioral Sciences, Arizona Inn, the Loft Theater, and this week in particular, the Racetrack Industry Program. Thank you very much, everybody. We appreciate it. And we'll see you, I believe it's in April. Is that the next one, Bill?
April 8th.
April 8th for the next one, which will be good night and good luck. Did I say that right?
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.